What if NATO collapsed today? Would tomorrow still look the same? Could global peace survive the shock? Big questions need bold answers, so let's dive in and explore the possibilities. NATO's original and strongest foundation has always been collective security. Basically, if you mess with one, you mess with all. Since 1949, it's expanded to 32 countries, first standing strong against the Soviet Union, and now quietly keeping peace among its own members. But now, imagine NATO collapsed overnight. Sounds like a gangster movie climax, right? But if this really happened, the global shockwaves would be brutal. Some countries might enjoy sudden freedom from obligations, but others, they'd be exposed, isolated, and potentially thrown into chaos. And if we're talking about the big shots, let's start with the United States. Without it, NATO's entire military backbone disappears. Worse, that cozy peace between the United States and Canada. Yeah, even that could start to crack. Sure, they're neighbors and trade partners, but without that NATO glue keeping things formal and structured, old disagreements over defense spending, Arctic claims, or border issues might heat up. Now, take a moment to think about NATO's military power. Without the United States, NATO loses its biggest contributor. And without NATO, many countries lose their power, not just in troops, but in cutting-edge tech. We're talking AI-powered targeting systems, autonomous drones, quantum-encrypted communication tools, hypersonic missiles, and advanced space-based surveillance. These aren't just flashy headlines, they're core parts of Europe's defense strategy, and they mostly come from the United States. Without that support, European allies could fall behind in modern defense. And that's not just about budget, it's about time. Defense modernization would slow down dramatically, and Russia wouldn't wait. Take the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Their relationship with Russia has always been shaky. They're tiny countries holding a very tense border with a powerful neighbor. Right now, it's NATO's presence that keeps Russia from pushing in. Remove that barrier, and the pressure might explode. Russia sees NATO as a threat. These Baltic countries, being NATO members, are both shielded and targeted because of that. So, if NATO were to fall apart, those front lines would instantly become more vulnerable, and Russia would likely seize the moment. And it's not just about tanks and borders. The United States currently provides the nuclear umbrella for Europe. Without that, NATO would rely solely on the UK and France for nuclear protection. That sounds doable, until you remember that France and the United Kingdom haven't exactly been best friends lately. Without NATO holding them together, even hypothetical tensions, like over overseas territories in the Caribbean or Pacific, could flare up. Imagine minor disputes escalating just because the alliance that used to cool things down is suddenly gone. But that's not the end of it. If NATO falls apart, it won't just affect big players like the US or the UK, it could throw open some of Europe's most fragile and long-standing disputes. Take Greece and Turkey, for example. Both are NATO members, but their history is anything but friendly. There have been ongoing tensions over Cyprus, maritime borders, and airspace violations over the Aegean Sea. Right now, NATO serves as a sort of buffer, keeping their disputes from turning into something worse. Without NATO keeping them at the table, those old rivalries could come roaring back, and fast. Then there's the Balkans. Serbia and Kosovo have had a bitter relationship ever since Kosovo declared independence in 2008. The only reason things haven't completely spiraled out of control again is because NATO has boots on the ground, maintaining peace and order. Without that presence, Serbia might be tempted to make aggressive moves, and without NATO acting as a deterrent, who would step in to stop it? And let's not forget the newest members of NATO, Finland and Sweden. These two countries finally joined the alliance because they're right next door to Russia. And with the war in Ukraine still raging, they're understandably nervous. In fact, their governments have even started giving citizens war preparedness advice, including instructions on what to do in the event of an invasion. For Finland and Sweden, NATO isn't just some political club, it's a lifeline. The alliance's key promise, Article 5, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all, is what gives them the confidence to stand up to any threat, especially from Russia. Now imagine if NATO wasn't there anymore. Suddenly, there's no guaranteed backup, no unified military support, just two small countries staring down a massive nuclear power with a history of pushing its borders. That's not just dangerous, it's terrifying. Now think beyond the obvious threats. African NATO partners like Morocco could face increased political instability, losing vital support systems that once helped maintain regional peace. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility lies right in the heart of Europe, Germany. Germany for years maintained a cautious military stance. But that may change fast. With rising global threats, Germany has already begun rearming on an impressive scale. Defense spending jumped from around 1.6% of GDP in 2023 to over 2.1% in 2024, and there's talk of pushing it even higher, up to 3.5% through constitutional reform. In 2024 alone, Germany approved 97 procurement contracts totaling around $53 billion, investing in next-gen military hardware. F-35 fighter jets, Leopard 2 A8 tanks, Puma infantry vehicles, Iris-T and Patriot missile defenses, Chinook helicopters, and long-range Taurus missiles. They're also leading the European Sky Shield initiative, working on a continent-wide missile defense umbrella with Israel's Arrow 4 and other advanced systems. Then there's the manpower surge, nearly 5,000 troops to be stationed in Lithuania by 2027. But if NATO collapses, expect Germany to accelerate everything, fast. Why? Because without NATO, countries like Russia and China will move quickly to assert dominance. Germany knows it has to act or be acted upon. This urgency might trigger a dangerous global chain reaction. Countries may make snap decisions to boost defense, and those decisions could have ripple effects. In the rush for self-preservation, preemptive safety measures, like sudden border closures or emergency troop deployments, could rattle nearby nations and spark regional conflicts. Then, activating large cyber defense networks might accidentally trigger cyber attacks or data breaches. And it can happen intentionally too, because no major power outside NATO is weak in cyber anymore. And while global giants wrestle for control, pirates, hackers, and rogue militias could see their opportunity. With governments distracted, these non-state actors might loot digital wallets, hijack trade routes, or smuggle weapons unchecked. And let's be honest, China isn't going to sit back and quietly watch the world unravel. Without NATO's counterbalance, China would likely act quickly, especially in the South China Sea and around Taiwan. Naval drills would turn into pressure tactics. Fishing boats and coast guards might cross red lines, not by accident, but as a show of strength. Taiwan, already walking a tightrope, would face increased military intimidation. In a world where NATO has vanished overnight, deterrence fades, and uncertainty fuels aggression. But China isn't just a military player, it's an economic powerhouse. As NATO's former members scramble to rebuild alliances and restructure defense systems, China could step in with strategic economic offers. Struggling European countries facing the fallout of NATO's collapse might be tempted. Infrastructure investments, trade deals, and energy partnerships may look too good to pass up in such unstable times. In doing so, China fills the vacuum left by the West. Not with tanks, but with influence. The result? A messy web of loyalties. Ex-NATO nations split between East and West, not based on ideology, but on survival and economics. And that split will be felt not just in diplomacy, but in wallets and paychecks. Meanwhile, global markets react sharply. The sudden loss of a major military alliance throws the world into financial panic. Stock markets around the globe nosedive, with investors pulling out of risky regions and safe havens becoming overcrowded. Currency values fluctuate, trade slows, even stable economies take a hit. This kind of vacuum doesn't just attract allies, it also emboldens rivals. BRICS, the coalition of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, could grow more assertive, offering an alternative world order. And then there's the United Nations. Already seen by some as slow and toothless, it might now be expected to pick up the pieces. But in the middle of collapsing alliances, growing military threats, and economic chaos, can the UN really fix this mess? Yet the biggest question isn't about governments or generals, it's about us, the people. Where do we run if our country becomes unsafe overnight? Do we pack up our lives and flee across borders already shutting down, or do we stay and risk the storm? Millions of people would suddenly find themselves in crisis. Families would be torn between staying safe or staying loyal. Students studying abroad may be left stranded without protection. Refugees, once seeking safety, now labelled as potential political threats. What we'd be living through wouldn't just be chaos on the news, it would be panic on our front doorsteps. Because if NATO collapsed, it wouldn't just mean changing a few flags or ending some meetings. It would break apart years of teamwork, peace, and global balance we've all counted on. The US pulling out would snap the backbone of the alliance. Russia wouldn't hesitate to push harder. China would make power plays fast. Small nations once protected are left exposed to old enemies. Germany, it could rise as a new military powerhouse. Meanwhile, silent wars, cyber attacks, digital invasions, and piracy would start creeping in as fear spreads. And above all, you and I, the people, would bear the brunt of it all. But relax, this hasn't happened, not yet. And to be frank, chances for a full collapse are also very low. But if it happens, are we ready to defend peace not just with weapons, but with wisdom? Drop it in the comments below. Smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe if you want more wild what-if journeys like this.